The Oromo was a very dignified race before the Abyssinians impoverished it. And this is what I get by reading a book through unknown African countries. This is a book that was published in 1897. And this is a book that was written by one A. Donaldson Smith, who made travels through the lands of the Somalis, the lands of the Oromos, and the lands of the Turkana, and the Rendile, and then through the Tana River to Lamu. And he tells us about meeting the Oromos. And one thing that caught my attention, and this is a theme that becomes almost constant in the books that were written in 1890s, especially about the Horn of Africa. And it is what the Abyssinians were doing. The Abyssinians were such a menace, not only to the Somalis, but also to the Oromos and other peoples who were found in the Horn of Africa. Douglas Collins, a book published in 1968 here for Somalia, discusses or talks about the raids in the Ogaden region by the Abyssinians. A.G.C. Swain, in his book 17 Trips Through Somaliland, published in 1895, he talks about the raids by the Abyssinians on the Somalis. And now I find this guy, he's also talking about the raids by the Abyssinians on not only the Somalis, but the Oromos. And the Abyssinians was so much feared, especially because they always came for the animals. They would drive huge herds of animals from the Somalis and the Oromos. In this book, he tells us about meeting the Oromos who were so scared when they saw him or they could see them from afar, they would disappear because they thought it was Abyssinians. The same thing is described by H.G.C. Swain, that when he went into the Ogaden region, the Somalis will see them and they will disappear because they thought it is the Abyssinians who come. And once they managed to make them realize that they were not Abyssinians, the first thing they will ask is for help to overcome the Abyssinians. The Somalis did that, and that is described by H.G.C. Swain in 17 Trips Through Somaliland. The Oromos, since they were doing the same, and we are going to read, when they saw this guy, Donaldson Smith, they were asking, would you help us defeat the Abyssinians? And I've discussed in another video that the Abyssinians had this upper hand when it came to its neighbors, the Oromos and the Somalis, because they managed to get rights to buy weapons, and these other people were not allowed. In the late 19th century, the Europeans seems to have come to an understanding amongst themselves that don't sell any powerful weapons to the African existing Commonwealth. So they were not selling weapons, but Abyssinia got a special treatment when it came to this, and they seem to have misused that privilege so much. Let's read and see what Donaldson Smith tells us about his encounters with the Oromos and their problems with the Abyssinians. This is what he writes. After a night rest, I sent men in all directions to see if they could find traces of natives, while I ascended the range of hills immediately to the west of the camp, from the top of which I could see the far inland, the country appearing like a vast undulating plain covered with the usual dried up brush one sees in Somaliland. Now, this is just after he had reached the border of the Somalis and the Oromos, and is now crossing westwards into the lands of the Oromos. He continues, but a short time was allowed me, however, to take compass bearings, as I soon heard a shot in the valley below me, not far off, and on hastening to the spot, found some of my boys had captured a youthful Oromo. They had fired in the air to frighten him so that they might stop his flight. He had sent out some of his men to try to find an Oromo so that they could use them to get information. He continues, it was most necessary to find some native who could tell us a little of the country ahead. Otherwise, if we left the river, we could not know when we might find water or what sort of obstacles we might encounter. So I had ordered my boys to capture any native they might see, provided they did not bodily harm. The young prisoner was too much frightened at first to give us any information, but I took him back to camp, hoping soon to gain his confidence. Here I found that some more of my boys had caught another native who proved to be more intelligent and communicative than the first, so they managed to capture two Oromo individuals. One party of 8 of my boys remained out all night, returning late the next morning. They said they had found a small river flowing into the Shebeli, about 20 miles above our camp. The two Oromo captives told me that this stream, which is called the Darde, came from a high mountains country lying far to the northwest, where it was cold and wet, and that this country, the people raised cereals, wove cloth, and lived in a town where there were stone houses. So they told them this river comes from the northwest, They gave them the description of the place and also that there was a town of stone houses. And this seemed to have surprised this guy Donaldson because he writes, they say the name of this town was Sheikh Hussein. This was most interesting news. Stone houses in this part of Africa. I made up my mind to visit this Sheikh Hussein if possible. The Oromo told us of great atrocities perpetrated by the Abyssinians. The Abyssinians had completely subjugated them 4 years previously, carrying off their boys and girls as slaves and capturing all their cattle and sheep. After several hours' hard work in the afternoon, we managed to get the caravan up the steep ascent and onto the level, bushy plateau and camped near some salt springs I discovered in riverbed. The waters of these springs tasting like magnesia sulfate and having the same effect. He continues, continuing north, we passed many villages from which all the people had fled, but we had made good enough friends of the two youthful Oromos now to trust one of them to run ahead and tell their people that friends were coming, not Abyssinians, but white people from a far off country who wished to travel peacefully and make friends with everyone. When we wanted food, we told them we would pay for it, and we were rich in clothes and many things the native would find useful. So they managed to make these two Oromo men they had captured to be friendly or to trust them, and they would send them out because they found it very difficult to meet the Oromo natives because the Oromo natives, whenever they saw strangers coming, they thought those must be Abyssinians. And that tells you how much they feared the Abyssinians. And this same thing used to happen, and H.G.C. Swain describes it in his book 17 Trips Through Somaliland. The Somalis of Ogaden, whenever they saw strangers coming, they will disappear because they thought those are the Abyssinians coming. He continues, wishing to explore the Darde, I started off with 20 of my boys, and Harry Beros, the other captive, who was now free to do as he pleased, to where my boys had reported the stream empty into the Webishebeli. Now, we are going to see him come or encounter chiefs, leaders of the Oromo people, and these chiefs are going to give him very interesting information about their conflict with the Abyssinians and what the Abyssinians were doing to them. He continues, after marching a short time northwest, we found ourselves suddenly on the edge of a rugged and picturesque canyon on 1,000 feet deep, through the middle of which the small stream, the Darde, wound its way into the Shebeli. We were not long in the climbing down the precipitous walls of the canyon and in reaching the Darde, which we followed for half a mile to its junction with the greater river. We found many footprints of native here, but none of the Oromos themselves. So after passing the restless night by the side of the stream without a tent and being nearly devoured by mosquitoes, I journeyed back to the caravan, noticing on our way a man and two women far off in the valley tending sheep. I sent Harry Parois and some of my boys to try to bring the three natives to our camp. They came to us willingly and told us they were the last native left in the neighborhood. All the rest of their countrymen had fled thinking we were Abyssinians. I persuaded them to accompany me to the camp, and then after loading them with presents, sent them ahead to quell the fears of their people. So there were these people who did not run away, and they give them the same story that the rest of the people had run away because they thought you people are Abyssinians. He continued marching on. We came to waterholes called Veji, where many natives joined us. Then he continues. He says, the natives near the Shebeli River are much poorer than those living farther to the west, but I was much struck by their refined features. They are very like the Somalis in their bronze color and curly wavy hair, and their voices are most musical and soft. So he's describing the Oromos as he found them to look like just the Somalis. Of course, maybe they speak a little bit differently, but they looked mostly like the Somalis. The large round shields they carry, made of the hide of oxen, are usually handsomely decorated, and their single long thrusting spears are well made, though very heavy. The short javelin or throwing spear is only occasionally found among them. I was surprised also at the excellent manner in which many of their ornaments were made. Tiny needles of iron, wood, and horn, and wooden combs, and little forceps for plucking out thorns, huge leaden bracelets, very prettily ornamented, and bracelets of ivory, being among the various things of native manufacture that attracted our attention at once. So he sees the Oromos, they have different kinds of ornaments that they've made from different types of materials, and seems like this guy was impressed He continues, I found that they also made very good at earthenware and wooden pots and jars, prettily shaped and usually having two handles to them. The men wore loincloth, while the women only clothing consisted of short skirts made of sheepskin. The natives, finding we were not Abyssinians, implored our protection against these marauders. They showed me ovens in their villages, in which they formerly used to make bread, buying their grain from the natives living in the agricultural districts about Sheikh Hussein. So at this point, it looks like the Oromos were not longer settled because they were running away from the Abyssinians. They had abandoned their more or less settled life, and they were living by just moving around. Now they said they were too poor to buy anything, the Abyssinians having left them scarcely enough sheep, goat for them to keep body and soul together. Their rulers demanded as taxes more than half of the increase of their flock yearly. So the Abyssinians will ask for such huge amount of taxes, sometimes twice what they could manage to produce in a year. He continues, Harry Barrois now left us, delighted with many fancy brass ornaments I gave him. He was the first but not the last man that came to us as a captive and a beggar, and went away great and rich according to their native ideas. Our next march was very short. It was a very short one, as I wished to interview an Oromo chief who was the first man of importance that had yet appeared. The old man welcomed us most heartily and brought us a present of some milk and fat sheep. He was tall, handsome man, and conducted himself in a very dignified fashion. The only thing that marred his stately bearing being the fact that he insisted upon tying about his neck an empty chutney bottle and the lid of a biscuit tin I gave him. So he says this chief looked very stately, looked very respectable, carried himself like you would expect a leader to carry themselves, except for the fact that he insisted on taking a bottle that this European had and tying it around his neck, and also a lid of a biscuit tin. Now, I think, yeah, to him it looked like he's lowering himself by doing those things, but he seemed not to have realized that these things were rare artifacts to this man. They were not things that he had seen before. And even to a European, if he sees something he had never seen before, it becomes a rare artifact, and you might want to, anybody actually might want to take and keep something that is very rare. Not everybody has it. So where this European comes from, those were very ordinary stuff. But where this individual lived, those were things he had never seen and were rare collectibles. So I don't think he should have judged him like that, but he judged him like that anyways. And then he continues, he told me that neither he nor any of his people believed we had crossed the flooded Webi, but that we must have dropped from the cloud to rid the country of the Abyssinians. So the Oromos were really troubled by the actions of the Abyssinians, just like the Somalis were, and they really hoped that one day somebody will come and defeat the Abyssinians. And the same thing you see the Somalis telling AGC Swain whenever he went into the land of the or in the Ogaden. They will tell him, have you come to beat the Abyssinians, to conquer the Abyssinians on our behalf? Like they were so eager that somebody will come and defeat the Abyssinians on their behalf. He continues, we crossed on September 9th the river Darde and camped at Berbade, where the river forms a small waterfall. The country of the Oromos we had gone through so far was very thinly populated, though from the number of deserted villages we had passed, there must have been formerly many inhabitants. So he figured out that there were not very many people he was encountering on the land. But looking at things that he could see, it looked like there used to be huge populations of the Oromos. And that tells you the Oromos had escaped and run away because of the actions of the Abyssinians. He continues, until you get well up into the mountainous regions, it is dry like Somaliland and suitable only for grazing purposes. Towards the north, it appeared to consist of series of high plateaus and mountain peaks rising one above the other, while to the south, a great extent of low-lying bushy country containing only a few isolated outstanding eminences rising to varying heights of from 1 to 3,000 feet spread out far below us. So he's describing the land. Of course, you are going up the Ethiopian islands at this point. He also gives us a drawing. I think he's the one who drew it, or somebody drew it, of the people he had met. As he says, a group of Arusi, could be Arusi or Arusa or Oromos. He continues, We now commenced to rise rapidly, reaching at the end of the next day March an elevation of 3,800 feet. The weather was cloudy and cool, and we began to feel a few raindrops. On reaching some of what was called Roko, a chief of village nearby named Jilo Nubona rushed out to meet us and implored us to recover a lot of sheep and cattle the Abyssinians had just carried off, and which he said had belonged to his dead brother. Same story, they find another chief. He has the same problem, the problem of Abyssinians coming and taking their animals in huge numbers, and also possibly killing many of them. He continues, I, of course, told him it would not do for us to interfere, as we wish to be friends with everybody. Of course, he could not afford to, of course, to start interfering with what the Abyssinians were doing, because he did not have the capacity, he did not have the legal ground to do anything really. He was just an explorer trying to understand the land, but the people expected some form of help at least. He continues, fortunately, we were able to get plenty of water at the end of nearly every march, but the country was very rough for the camels. We marched about 6 hours daily, but only made 9 or 10 geographical miles in a straight line northwest. On September 12th, we arrived at a place called Vursa, where two chiefs, Aushe Burde and Dardi Hari of the Wachali tribes, who formerly lived near our crossing place on the Shebeli River, came to us bringing two fine eating camels besides spear and native ornaments, which I had expressed desire to collect. They told the same sad story we had heard from every Oromo. They were very fine-looking men. It was pathetic to the last degree to see them break into tears as they described how the Abyssinians were reducing them to poverty. Aushe Burde was stationed at present in this country by the Abyssinians to collect taxes, as it is the custom of the Abyssinians to enlist many natives in government service. So the people were saying the Abyssinians are making us very poor. They are impoverishing us, taking our animals. They don't care about anything else, just get the animals and drive them to their land. Now, of course, the Abyssinians must have had a different story. And when we say the Abyssinians here, it's basically the Amhara and maybe the Tigrinya and the Tigray and others who formed the early Abyssinian Empire. And they must have their own story, of course. Maybe they thought we've captured, and they were acting just like any power would act during this time. Every powerful commonwealth usually will take stuff from those that were weak around them. So it is not that the Abyssinians were doing anything out of the ordinary. It's just that the Abyssinians, in this context, had an advantage that was given to them by the Europeans, because the Europeans came to see them as sort of equals, not really, but sort of equals. They could allow to get guns, but not the other Africans. And that created a power imbalance, which in fact H.G.C. Swain does go into in his book, 17 Trips Through Somaliland. Now, I'm still reading this guy's book. We're seeing where he's going. Of course, he's going to move southwards up to what we know today as Kenya, and then go to the coastal parts of what we know as Kenya today, Lamu. Those are my random thoughts.